Another 2 wins for the New York Knicks. They knock off the Magic. They knock off the Wizards, Alex. You could say they won the Tri-Wizard tournament. Jalen Brunson dropped 55 in the second game. We're going to talk about it now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Talking to you on the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. Check them out on all forms of social media at thestrick.land. And we wanted to both remind you that your favorite podcast now is a newsletter introducing the Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com. And start your day with writing from Alex, writing from me, writing from our national writers who are fantastic here at Locked On. And of course, Josh Lloyd giving you the latest and the best in fantasy basketball. Again, that's the free Locked On Knicks newsletter. We also remind you to subscribe. If you're not already, be sure to hit that subscription button on YouTube, hit that notifications bell so you don't miss an episode. Leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. I noticed, Alex, I went on Apple Podcasts. We haven't gotten a review in like months. I don't care if it's, or at least a written one. I don't care if it's positive, if it's negative in what you're writing. As long as you leave 5 stars, it is all good. The New York Knicks, maybe not a 5-star weekend, but we could call it like a 3.5-star weekend. Alex, I'm going to feel like such a jerk complaining about these games, like given I was just thinking about it because like I was going to come in and say, yeah, no, the defense wasn't where it's supposed to be. And like the offense across the board had some issues and some minutes problems. And I feel like a guy who just won the lottery and is telling his neighbor about how his in-home sauna is not hitting quite the right temperature in the morning. So that's where I'm at. But it was a successful weekend overall for the Knicks. They win 2. They've now won 7 in a row. They've won 12 of their last 14 games. I'll just quickly mention what happened in the Magic game, and then you can take us through the Wizards game. But the Orlando game was just a war. No Paolo Banchero, no Franz Wagner, but the Magic just keep winning. They beat the Celtics. They had a historic comeback against the Miami Heat right after this game. They were down 97-80 against the Nets, and they come back and won. I say all that to say this is an incredibly scrappy team. The Knicks couldn't make a single shot. The Magic sort of took them down in the mud, and the Knicks went down in there and just beat the crap out of them in the second half of this one. Orlando was up 63-62 in the third quarter. Jalen Suggs went out with his 5th foul. Towns was out with his 4th foul. It didn't matter. Without Suggs, Orlando had no offense. The Knicks really turned up defensively, 23-7 run to put this game away. Jalen Brunson, I thought, even though the second game was obviously the more impressive one, he was masterful against the Magic, particularly in the first half. Josh Hart kind of carried them throughout the second, and the Knicks were able to separate and win, which set up a frustrating but certainly more exciting game against the Washington Wizards.
Yeah, I mean, I will say real quick before we close the door on the overall narrative of the Orlando game, I do think it's hard to say that the Knicks had I would say they had a 50-50 defensive weekend, because I think that no matter what, if you hold any NBA team in 2024, about to be 2025, to 85 points in a game and 31 points in a half, like that, it was impressive. It was a really impressive defensive showing, I think, to finish that game off. But less impressive was the game against the Wizards, as you were alluding to, and the first of 2 straight that the Knicks will play in Washington against the Wizards. A weird scheduling quirk. A second weird scheduling quirk is, didn't they already have this happen? Or maybe, am I thinking back to last year? I think it was
something the NBA is doing to reduce travel. Like the Kings have played the Lakers 3 times, I think, in the last 10 days, which is fun. But
yeah, it's kind of crazy. And I seem to remember, I think it was actually last year, now that I think about it. The Bucks came to New York. I think it was for Christmas Day last year?
And yeah, I think it was because of the in-season tournament. I think they played them twice in a row, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that. No, I think that was just part of the schedule. But either way, the NBA making it a thing now that, teams just travel to a city and then just play 2 games there, but not as a back-to-back either, which is interesting. So the Knicks were on the second game of a back-to-back. You can maybe say that that's part of why they came out the way they did. I would say in general, they just looked like they were a little dead-legged on defense. They also were, I mean, I don't totally fault them. They were definitely taking the chance of, hey, this is the third worst 3-point shooting team in the NBA. So we're going to let them take some threes. And then, the Wizards kind of found themselves a little bit, shot 17 of 38 from 3. So that's 45% for those of you keeping track at home. It was a punch by punch game. I mean, they were just throwing haymakers down the stretch, but Jalen Brunson threw the most haymakers, not even from distance. I mean, he struggled from the 3-point line, 3 of 11 from 3. So he really had to make this happen the hard way. 55 points on 18 of 31 shooting. If you do the math there, that means that he went 15 of 20 from 2-point range, 16 of 17 from the free throw line. So took care of business there as well. He was the one Knick to really consistently get to the free throw line in this game. Also dished out 9 assists. I mean, just one of those games where credit to the Wizards. They tried the same thing that everybody else has been trying, of putting a bigger, lanky player on him. I thought Bilal Coulibaly at certain points had really good impact on Brunson, particularly in like the second quarter. I think that he kind of found his own. Also, Justin Champagnie, who had 31 points in this game, I thought had some good defensive possessions on Brunson as well. But ultimately, the Knicks were able to, find the looks that they wanted for Brunson. They were able to, run the pick and roll to get Brunson on switches, sometimes getting Sarr on him. And anytime that Alexander Sarr was on him, I feel like he cooked him. That guy, he looks really good too, but I think he's just not quite ready to play against one of the best offensive players in the league just yet. But all in all, I mean, I was pretty impressed with the Wizards. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'll give them their flowers right here. Like, I think they've drafted a pretty good compilation of talent here between Sarr, Coulibaly, Champagnie, Bub Carrington, and then Malcolm Brogdon and Jonas Valanciunas is kind of like the steadying veteran hands there. I think they did a pretty solid job. It was just, the Knicks ran into one of those situations where I think any team in the NBA can beat you any given night. And luckily they were able to pull it out and just, scrap their way on the second game of a back-to-back into a 4-point win, where it was really funny when I was watching this. I watched this on delay. I'm currently moving into a new house. So I was painting all weekend. And so I was watching both these games at once. And I knew how many points Brunson had. I knew what the final score was going to be. And as things were going in the fourth quarter and overtime, I kind of had these moments where I was like, especially in overtime, where I was like, oh, I know what the final score is. I know how many points Brunson has. I know how many he's going to end up with. So that means Brunson's just going to score all the rest of the points. And I mean, just a crazy second half for him. Double-digit points in both the third and fourth quarter, and then did he have double-digit in overtime? And not quite double-digit in overtime, but 9 points in overtime. Just a great performance by him. He really put the team on his back. And Gavin, after you and I were, I won't say worrying, but at least acknowledging the fact that he had some down games recently, I think these last 2 games have done a lot to kind of quell any fears about, if Brunson's going to figure it out or whatever. Obviously, he's still Jalen Brunson. There are going to be some down games, but I think he's starting to figure it out as far as how to beat these longer defenders that every team is putting on him.
Yeah, and we can talk about it more next segment. It was maybe I was a little less generous than you with Washington. Not they played well. They shot the heck out of the basketball, which is why I was close. They were 17 of 38 from 3, 45% from distance. But I thought that the third quarter in particular was certainly the worst defensive quarter the Knicks have played this year. I would say it was a bottom 5 defensive quarter or so. Maybe I'm wiping out some bad memories from the early years, but I'm going to say bottom 5 defensive quarter since Tom Thibodeau took over. Like it was just gross. Again, I can get into more detail next segment, but I have about a page of notes that are just defensive mistakes from guys across the board. And a lot of it was Karl-Anthony Towns. He was really bad, but it would be totally wrong to just pin it on him. Mikal Bridges, like, really struggled fighting around screens. OG Anunoby, probably his single worst defensive game as a Knick. Like, he was tripping all over himself and giving up a lot. Jalen Brunson certainly wasn't immune, but the Knicks still won because they had Jalen Brunson, and the Washington Wizards didn't. Some pretty incredible stats to come out of the Jalen Brunson performance in under 2.5 years, Alex. Now second in Knicks history in 50-point games. Of course, it's a different game. It's certainly a little bit easier to score 50 today than it was in the past. I don't think that wipes out what Jalen does. It's still really, really hard to get to 50 points, and he's done it 3 times in 2.5 years. 2 away from tying Bernard King for the all-time Knicks record. The Knicks also became, this is kind of a niche stat, but I thought it was such a cool number from the MSG broadcast. I think they were the first people to have it. First team in NBA history with 4 different guys scoring 40-plus points before New Year's Eve in NBA history. Obviously, OG got there. Mikal just got there against the Spurs. Cat's done it twice. And Jalen, to your point, like I was in the exact same situation. I was in North Carolina working for CBS Sports. I watched the game like on delay the night after, and I was just like sitting there like slack-jawed and being like, all right, how is Jalen gonna, he had 27 like late third quarter. I was like, he gets to 55, and he got to 55. It was a welcome sight, because when he's had great games this year, it's mostly been because he was cooking from distance, to your point, not and had to go shoot 75% from 2. And it was those floaters over and over and over again. I mentioned this a few times, but if you missed those episodes, he's been way down from floater range, shooting something like 6% worse this season than he normally does. I haven't gotten a chance to check cleaning the glass today. I would wager if I did, I would see that number bumped up 2 or 3 points just based off this Wizards game alone. He was absolutely insane, to your point. Over and over again down the stretch of this game, calling up Josh Hart to set his screen and just sort of like doing some predatory matchup hunting, picking on Alex Sarr, making some French toast, getting into the lane, jumpers, floaters, kept going back to this like one same move where he would essentially like, he would do like a little like step back, keep his dribble alive, take advantage of the fact that the NBA doesn't really call carries anymore, hesitation dribble, and just toast whoever was guarding him, get into the lane, get a floater, like going to that over and over again. I loved having Hart screen for him. I thought in a game that was not particularly well coached by Tom Thibodeau, and I wish he did different things in terms of his substitution patterns, that was really smart to just pick on Sarr down the stretch. And Jalen, who had to work so hard for most of his buckets throughout the game, Sarr's going to be a really good, really dangerous switch defender down the road. He's just not quite ready to guard Jalen Brunson in that situation against someone as good as Brunson is.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We could talk more through it. I think ultimately they were just sort of bamboozled a little bit by a young, fast team that was playing hard, but also just made more shots than you would typically think. Though I do agree. I think that their pick and roll defense was pretty terrible. I mean, Brogdon cooked them. I mean, Brogdon really knew what to do. Is sort of the veteran leading hand there. But we'll get into that more in a minute. Maybe talk a little more about the Magic game as well, and then just some more implications that have come out of this weekend going into some games pushing us towards the new year. So we'll talk about all that in just a moment.
But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Rocket RX. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. You might not need it after a Jalen Brunson 55-point game, but Jalen's not going to score 55 every night. So no more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging with Rocket RX. You'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation. You can get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com. Code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. All right, we are back here on Locked On Knicks. Alex, I'll throw it to you in just a sec. I just wanted to present a little bit of a hot case. I think Jalen Brunson's first half against the Magic might have been the most impressive half he played all weekend. And that's probably wrong. It's probably because I was so just grossed out by the defense in the Wizards game. I felt like I couldn't fully enjoy what was obviously just incredible shot making from Jalen. But I thought the way he played against Orlando, where Cat was doing nothing, right? Like Cat had like 3 points in the first quarter. Like Bridges was not particularly hot. It was 2 games in a row where OG, he was a little bit better against Orlando than against Washington, but he was pretty quiet offensively, single digits, I believe, in both those games. And Jalen against like Anthony Black, who, like, if you look at like the stats on B-Ball Index, like one of the better perimeter defenders in basketball and 6 inches taller, we should note, than Jalen Brunson. And Jalen over and over again was just cooking the guy, like late shot clock, like a tough midi over him, like great passing, like hitting Mikal Bridges for a layup. 3 different times he went back to the same move where he just does like that reverse pivot, like 1 foot fadeaway And it just kept going in over and over again. I believe it was his last bucket of the game was the best one, like spin in, spin out, fake the pass outside, then a step in layup from the elbow. Like I cannot, I think it's hard for, like, we all see the final product of Jalen Brunson. I cannot imagine just like you hear 10,000 hours. I assume Jalen's put 20,000 hours into his footwork. Like, it's just so incredible. It's so on point. I know I take it for granted at times, but he was just masterful against the Magic. And I think it set up his confidence for being like, all right, I got to score every point against the Wizards. I'll do that. I didn't even mention it. Second quarter against the Wizards was responsible. I counted. He was involved in 19 straight points, either scoring, assisted, or a hockey assist. Like, that's how central he was. That's how important he was. His passing against Orlando had like 6 assists in the first half. Felt like he made the right decision every time. Like, it was just a brilliant weekend of offensive basketball for Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, it's a good segue because I was about to point out, the fact that not only did he have 14 points in that first half, but also 7 assists. So
Yeah.
Accounted for 28 of the Knicks' 54 points, if you look at it that way. Some of the assists, I just went back and watched a couple of them. Some of them were like one of those where you hit someone and then they take a few dribbles and sort of create the shot and you get the assist. Okay, fine, whatever. But, for narrative purposes, I'm going to say Jalen Brunson fully accounted for 28 of 54 points for the Knicks in that half. Either way, I mean, yeah, I think that we're starting to see, granted, he took advantage of a couple of younger defenders over a whole weekend of basketball. So, maybe take it a little bit with a grain of salt because, maybe this isn't going to translate against, Dyson Daniels, for example, who's, like the best wing defender in the NBA right now. And it's the guy who probably set the blueprint for like how most to disrupt Jalen Brunson, although that I can kind of be said for like anyone he defends this year. He's just a really good defender. But I think that with Black and with Koulibaly and with Champagny, even like Brunson has just managed to find a place where he's not relying as much on his perimeter game, like for as great as that first half was against Orlando, again, didn't even attempt a three, 0-0 from 3-point range and 6 of 10 from inside the arc. I think that he's sort of finding his inside game again, which I think was the thing that we saw he was able to beat. Like, if we look back to last year's playoffs, for example, like Kelly Oubre, when the Sixers put Kelly Oubre on him, if you get a long defender on Brunson on the perimeter, that's enough to disrupt him there and make things not work as well on the perimeter. And, where he's trying to get his step back threes and, all that stuff. And, if you get a guy that can slither over a screen, that means Brunson can't get a clean 3-point look that way. But the way that Brunson really, got his advantage over bigger defenders in last year's playoffs, and then as things have gone on this year and that he's starting to get back to, is he gets inside and then he just puts that footwork to use, and whether that's great footwork off of a pick and roll to then create the, start stop opportunity to get a guy into his side or into his back, just overrunning him to try to protect at the rim so that he can hit a floater and get a bump and a foul, or whether it's like, stopping and just hitting him with a million pivots and a million fakes and a fake pass here, a fake, going up for a little baby hook there. And then all of a sudden he's under the guy and he's able to get a look. He's starting to go back to those things. And I think that that's going to start keeping defenders honest. And, maybe it means less perimeter shots for Brunson any given night, which I don't love. I still wish that they would. And, that they've been getting away from this a little bit because they've had to rely on Brunson so much to just be the center of the offense the last few games again. But, I do wish that they would find some situations to, run some pick and rolls with Mikal Bridges and like Karl-Anthony Towns, and run some pick and rolls with Josh Hart and Karl-Anthony Towns, something like that, just to let Brunson get free off ball and take, maybe 3 threes a game that way. Cause he's super effective at, making catch and shoot 3-pointers for his career, especially his Knicks career. But yeah, I think he's starting to get back to his roots a little bit, which is why we're seeing these sort of vintage Brunson performances here, where he's, scoring at will on the inside, the floater's going again. I mean, it also just helps straight up when the floater is going, because, we saw, I think he was, you could see the frustration in him the last couple of weeks where he was getting to his spot with those floaters and they just weren't going in for one reason or another. And it was just a little bit too strong or a little too weak or a little to the side or whatever. And he just seemed a little off in that regard. The floater's back, and as a result, Brunson's back and, doing all the things we expect him to do. So I would expect that trend to continue in the second straight game against Washington tonight. Because, once he's cooking like that, I don't think there's any way to really stop him at that point.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, maybe next we get a little bit more into the defense. We can talk Mikal Bridges, and I want to talk about the minutes because I have some concerns. We'll get into it next on Locked On Knicks. All right, so let's talk defense and minutes. We're gonna take our medicine, and then we'll get the chocolate bar, the proverbial chocolate bar, at the end of the show. I think these two things are closely linked, and I'll zoom in on OG Anunoby here, who I'll credit our guy XJ, who's coming on the show on Friday, for bringing this up, because I've mentioned it, I feel like, a few times, but I feel like the Knicks are courting disaster to some extent with OG Anunoby. This is a guy who has played 70 plus games in his career once. He's played every single game this year. And while doing that, he's putting up a career high in minutes. He's at 36 minutes right now, 36.4. That is slightly above the 21-22 number. Last two seasons before this one, he was at 33, 35. Again, that's not like it's an extra 2 minutes, not the biggest concern in and of itself. It's more so that he's doing that while playing every single game. And I think you're starting to see it affect his legs a little bit. I think you're starting to see it with Mikal Bridges a little bit, who I thought was having a renaissance defensively. And to be clear, I thought really stepped up in the second half of that Magic game after having a tough first half where he was guarding Jalen Suggs, and Jalen Suggs was the only thing working for the Orlando Magic. He had 11 points in the first 3.5 minutes of that game. And a lot of it was like Mikal, again, like just struggling with his screen navigation, Towns forced to play 2-on-1, and Towns falling apart as a drop defender. And that carried over to the Wizards game with Karl-Anthony Towns. And the point I'm trying to make is you need Hart, Mikal, and Anunoby to cover up for Brunson, to cover up for Cat, who are going to have relatively good nights and relatively bad nights, but are just always going to be liabilities to some extent defensively. You need those guys at peak energy, and that's tough to do when OG Anunoby is just having a load on him that he's never had in his career. When Mikal Bridges is leading the NBA in minutes, and Josh Hart is maybe the guy who has the least responsibility of those three, and in turn, the one who falters the least, but once or twice a game just completely falls asleep off ball. Alex, I won't bore people with it. I could probably do 45 minutes on the defensive issues. Again, I tortured myself a little bit. I wrote down a page of notes, every time I saw these guys messed up, but it's a long list for Karl-Anthony Towns. This was his worst defensive game in about 12 or 13 games, just zero resistance. At one point, Bilal Coulibaly got an offensive rebound, just dusted him. Jonas Valanciunas went for a reverse layup, and Cat is just sort of standing there with his arms straight up, not even really moving. Orlando probably takes it out of you physically, unlike any team in the NBA. So it's a really tough team to have on a front end of a back-to-back. But I thought the effort was just embarrassing at points. OG Anunoby wasn't really his fault, but he was tripping all over himself. Gave up a wide open corner three, or wing three rather, because he just fell down on a drive, and Kispert went coast to coast for a transition layup. Bridges again would just be chasing, and there wouldn't be any help there, and you'd see just Bub Carrington. It looked like he was playing just in practice, walking in to open jumper after open jumper. Jalen, for as good as he was offensively, zero resistance on the other end of the floor. Shamet, after a good defensive game against the Magic, was getting toasted. I'll cut myself off, but the point is just a gross defensive game. And I think, especially on a back-to-back, it would have been kind of smart for Tom Thibodeau to lean on the bench. And I don't know if you agree with this. If the Knicks lost to the Wizards because they had to play, I don't know, Sims or Hukporti for 10 minutes, or had to play Shamet for 20 minutes, or God forbid, Cam Payne, who cooked the last time he played 19 minutes, was out on the floor for more than 6 minutes, I would have been okay with it. I don't mind the Knicks dropping a few regular season games if it means they're healthy and just physically ready for the playoffs. And right now, I thought the minutes narrative was BS last year. I think it deserves to be talked about right now.
I mean, yeah, it has been BS for a number of years. If you looked at previous years, the Knicks, Brunson was the only guy that was even near the top 10 in minutes per game last year.
Julius generally. But
Julius was close, but yeah, it fell out of. I guess by the end of the year, he wasn't listed on the minutes,
yeah.
But he was close, but still not as high as Brunson. So I mean, he was still only maybe top 15. Now you've got like, I mean, I haven't checked the updated leaderboard recently, but I think you have 3 or 4 guys in the top 15 for the Knicks right now. And like 2 guys, I mean, Mikal Bridges is leading the league in minutes. OG and Hart are, I think they were tied for 6th or something in minutes per game the last I looked. Brunson is the only one who's managed to get a little bit of respite there, just thanks to the depth of his position and the fact that Tibbs generally will give him the time off faster than anybody else. And, you know, Towns also sort of hovering around that like top 10. But all the guys on the Knicks right now are right around the top 10 in minutes per game. You don't let see it. You don't let see it where they're facing the Wizards of all teams and have to expend themselves that much. And it kind of goes against like common sense, the fact that he did push the starting rotation so hard in this game, because I actually thought in the Magic game, the extended rotation did pretty well. Like Landry Shamet came in and got his first look at like real minutes, like early in a game, and came in immediately, banged a 3. He made a nice like little running baseline layup at one point. Like I thought that he had a good, you know, little stint, and I think he played, I don't know, 12 minutes or something in the Magic game, and then only 6 minutes in this one. And I don't actually know if he hit the floor in the second half. It was just not a, you know, not a long bench in the second half. Same with Campaign. I think he only played in the first half and then didn't see the floor in the second half, or if he did, it was very minimal, very forgettable. Let's see real quick, just to see if I'm right. No, neither of them saw the floor in the second half. I mean, it just doesn't really make any sense. You know, I think that Tibbs is kind of reverting to some of his worst tendencies in that way. And I think that, you know, for the most part, like Bridges, I don't think really shows the dead legs as much as like OG Anunoby, but I do think that OG is starting to look a little gassed down the stretch of games, and you could probably chalk that up. I mean, in the Wizards game, you could probably chalk it up to the back-to-back too. Like everybody looked a little sluggish. Cat, for as good as he looked on offense, looked really sluggish on defense.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe it's just that, but if that's the case, then you're facing a team with 5 wins. I know that they're kind of scrappy, but like throw your bench out there a little bit, you know, like give Shamet and Payne a few more minutes. Like there's certainly no slouches. Like Payne, you know, has been getting a lot of steals. He's provided some energy threes. Like he only took 2 shot attempts, so it's not like he was chucking you out of the game in the first half, like he can sometimes, you know. And maybe Tibbs' gripe was, oh, he wasn't aggressive enough. But if that's the case, then just give him a pep talk at halftime and turn him loose in the second half, you know. And then Shamet, like again, I'm a little bamboozled that he didn't get more playing time, because in the first game against the Magic, I mean, I thought that he was a part of the key run that sort of let the Knicks start putting them away. Like he had some key steals. You know, he was getting his hands in there and you know, creating disruption. There was one, I forget who he stripped. Was it might have been Suggs, but really good strip steal at one point in the Magic game where I was like, oh yeah, like if he could do that on defense, then you don't have to even worry about the, you know, the defense with him. You know, if he's going to have active hands and, you know, use his fouls wisely and stuff, like he's only going to be a 15 to 20 minute per game player, ideally, by the time that, you know, he really gets integrated here. So if he's willing to, you know, stop a drive here and there by either going for an aggressive strip, or if it ends up a foul, it ends up a foul, then cool. But yeah, I mean, I thought that he definitely earned a little more of a shot in this one. Maybe it was just the fact that like Precious and Deuce were not shooting particularly well. Like those two, when I combined 2 of 8 overall, Deuce did not have the 3 again. And I mean, you certainly can't use the minutes excuse for him, because he has just not been getting a ton, because he's just not shooting well. But maybe just the fact that those two weren't playing well, it led to punishment by association for Shamet and Payne in the second half of this one. But those two have been playing really well lately. It was kind of bizarre to me that they didn't get more of a shot. But yeah, I'm with you. It just seems like there's a lot of expenditure going on, you know, using up a lot of valuable minute karma here early on in the season, that maybe he's just banking on, oh, the All-Star break is in a month's time, you know, like we just got to get through that and whatever. But if you keep setting, you know, milestones like that, it was like the Knicks just had a break like that a week ago, and already guys are looking kind of dead-legged, you know, after the in-season tournament. So I don't know. To me, it reads like they need to start expanding the rotation a little more. I don't want it to come at the expense of wins necessarily, but I think that Tibbs needs to just understand that, like, you're not always going to win every minute of every game with every player on the floor. You know what I mean? So like if you're not winning the minutes with the bench players, that doesn't mean play the starters more. It means if you give the starters a little bit of a rest, they can come in and go on more of a run. And a fresh-legged OG Anunoby can give you a little more than a dead-legged OG Anunoby can late in the game. So hopefully he starts coming to that realization. I am glad at least that on paper, though, they're back to a 9-man rotation rather than the 8-man rotation that they've been rolling with. But still, I hope that Tibbs soon, kind of starts giving the Shamits and Paynes of the world a little more in the way of minutes. And I mean, maybe it's just so simple as the Knicks need a couple blowouts to give the starters a little bit of rest, but it shouldn't just be that. There should be a little more baked in rest time for these guys, I think. And I think that's something that Tibbs needs to figure out as the year goes on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, he finds a way to play Mikal Bridges 42 minutes in games they win by 30 points. Like the Magic, they were up by 20 most of the way down the stretch. Mikal plays 44 minutes. Like OG played 28. That tells me that you could have gotten Mikal off the floor a little bit more. And he's sort of like the new, like he's kind of what Josh Hart was at the end of last year for Tom Thibodeau. Like he's the new pacifier for Tom Thibodeau. I looked it up while you were talking. Mikal first in minutes, Josh Hart fifth in minutes, OG Anunoby 10th in minutes in the entire NBA. And like where I fall back on this is like the Knicks got totally screwed from an injury standpoint in the playoffs last year, right? Just the worst luck you've ever seen. They've had some of the best injury luck in the NBA this year. I'm not sure. I know there was a site where you could find it. If someone wants to point me in the right direction, I'd appreciate it. But I would wager, Alex, the Knicks have missed the least games due to injury from their starters of any team in the NBA this year, right? Mikal's missed what? Mikal hasn't missed one. Obviously, hasn't missed one his whole career. OG hasn't missed one. Towns missed one or two. Jalen's missed one. I think Josh had the personal reasons game and maybe one other game where he had an injury. Like they've had their starting lineup all season long. And look, it's gotten them, like I probably should have mentioned this at the top, like it's gotten them to a great point, right? They're third in the East. They're approaching the Celtics. They're tied with the Grizzlies for the fourth best record in basketball. They have the fifth best net rating in the entire NBA, right? Like it's worked playing these guys all these minutes. And I think if you were to like give Tom Thibodeau truth serum, he would tell you like, you know where we have to catch up right now? The Celtics have years of baked-in chemistry, or at least with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown, years of baked-in chemistry. The Cavs have played together for 3 seasons now. That's why they look so good. Like this team, like he is trying to microwave reps into this team. Benji made this point on Twitter. Like the one upside of the Wizards game is like this team figuring out how to win close games, figuring out like who has the ball, where they should be. And all that stuff is stuff you need to know to win the playoffs. And I hear that. I am just not at a point where I would rather get the 2 seed and say, hey, guess what? You got out of the first round. You maybe you play the Sixers again as the 7 seed and you go 7 games in the first round with the Sixers. Guess what the reward is? You get the Boston Celtics walking into MSG and maybe you lose in 6 in the second round, right? That could be the reward because it looks like, I mean, a lot of season ago, looks like Cleveland's going to be the 1 seed. If you lose a couple games because these guys only play 32 minutes. And to your point, I'm not sure if they'd be worse with these guys being less minutes because it pays off the rest of the game when they're fresher. But if you lose 3 more games and you're the 4 seed and you play whatever Indiana in the first round and Cleveland in the second round, bravo. Like that is the best case scenario. And Tom Thibodeau is so hell-bent on winning every single game, every single minute that I don't know if he always sees the long-term picture. Now, in his defense, the flip side of this argument is that the bench just hasn't quite given the Knicks enough. And to your point, you can go back and forth on that. I think Campaign, even though I don't think he's played well in his few minutes the last few games, I think he's earned some trust, right? He's earned the benefit of the doubt. Landry Shamet, like I'm with you. He was awesome defensively against the Magic. I thought he sucked defensively against the Wizards. Like he was out there for 7 minutes. He was getting toasted. But to your point, the guy's been in the NBA for 6 years and he's been an okay defender. Like give him a chance, especially against Washington where you can survive. And also, again, no one else was defending. So I know that's a long rant on it. I spent more time on that than anticipated. Maybe we're going to have to shortchange some guys in the recap. Like, I don't know if you had any final notes on individual players. I just wanted to say, like, I thought Cat was amazing offensively against the Wizards. You said it as well, but he had a 3-minute stretch where he scored like 8 points and then in the second quarter and then a 5-minute stretch in the fourth quarter where he scored 10, hit another one of those like nasty, like one-step fadeaways. Josh Hart, both of these games was pretty awesome, like 13, 11, and 7 against the Wizards. And when no one had any energy in overtime, like he set the tone. He got them a few different easy buckets. He's somehow even better against the Orlando Magic. 23 and 13. Like that is just a ridiculous game for a 6'5" guy to have against the most physical team in the NBA. he really impressed me. Mikal Bridges, 6 free throws against the Orlando Magic, Alex. I feel like we gotta throw a birthday party for him. Like shout out to Mikal Bridges, actually attacking the rim, trying to get fouled, like getting layups, like Euro stepping over Contavious Caldwell-Pope. All three of those guys had some really good moments this weekend. And then Deuce McBride, to your point, hasn't scored 20 points since the first game of the season. So the Knicks continue to need a lot more from him, and that would make it easier on Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add. I think we've talked enough about 2 games that were I mean, I would say the Magic one was somewhat impressive.
Yeah.
The Wizards game less impressive outside of the fact of Jalen Brunson. Jalen and Cat combining for 85 points, Brunson 55 of those. So I think we can safely close the book on these 2 games. Of course, one more Magic-themed game. So we'll see if the Knicks really are just the anti-Magic folks, the chief muggles among us, and can beat all of the Magic folks and beat the Wizards a second time in Washington tonight. We'll have you recap tomorrow on that, and then more great episodes as we go on this week. But until then, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.